Hello everyone. This is an introductory session to the use of aesthetics in academic writing. So it's a short session, our first session, so let's relax and enjoy it. The model I developed together with my postgraduate students, and we based it on the findings of Professor Ramachandran, who works in the United States. Professor Ramachandran is probably #1 neuroscientist in the world. He identified a number of functions or rules that the brain utilizes in order to make sense of the world. And I will not bore you with all of them, but we have them all identified on the left. So here they are. I was thinking to myself that we might use a painting this is not a painting, this looks like a painting, but it's a photograph. It's a photograph of a studio of a painter or of a photographer. It's a studio. So we might actually have a look at these qualities to just briefly introduce them in relation to this photograph. One thing that we can say instantly before we actually go into these concepts here, we can say that this painting looks, or this picture looks ordered, right? There is an order here. It is not a mess. It is crowded. It has a lot of things in it, right? It's not an empty picture. It doesn't just have nothing in it or one thing. It has a lot of things, but they are ordered, right? And they're ordered in a specific way, in fact. If we looked at this picture, what do we see? We see a frame. So someone put together just broken pieces of glass, and they are organized here in those little squares. And you might think it's nothing. You could do it, right? Absolutely. But you can see that again, there is something about the way the pictures or the broken glasses are organized that you want to look at it and try to make sense out of it, and maybe see where these things come from and how they relate to each other. It engages you a little bit, right? So there is enough order in this picture to attract your attention and make you actually think a little bit about the photo. Now, we couldn't say the same about this drawing, could we? It is simpler, isn't it? Right? So you look at it and you just had seen it. You can just move away. It's a little bit different than this one, right? This one is more pleasing. You can imagine having a photo like this or a painting like this in your room. It's not likely that you would have this in your house or even this, right? So this one is even simpler. So you can already see that there is something about aesthetics that we can actually summarize in the form of a principle. You would like the picture to be orderly in some way, right? To have some order, to maybe have some balance, right? So that all these pieces which are around the picture are not just all together in one space, but they kind of spread around. There is some order here. So we would like some symmetry and balance, right? So you can straight away see what symmetry and balance. Things are sort of organized around the room or around the picture in a way that we can feel there is a balance. What else do we see? Problem solving, but it engages us. What is it? Is it a studio? You kind of, it's more complicated than this or that, right? It engages our eye a little bit more than those simple children drawings. So it actually engages us in a kind of process of problem solving. We're looking at it, we analyzing what's in it. Did you notice, friends, there's here a red chair? Look at that. Did you see that? That's interesting, isn't it? And a lot of paintings, right? So it's a very busy studio. It's a very nicely done photograph. So what do we have here? We have a problem-solving function here. We have symmetry and balance. Do we have contrast? We do, don't we? We have a black here and this amazing light orange, yellow, whatever colors are here. That's wonderful, isn't it? We have contrast. So this drawing of an artist is contrasted with that dark cloth here, hanging here, so that we can actually see it better, right? So what else do we have here? Do we have isolation? Isolation is something kind of made as a point of focus, like very special point of focus. And definitely it's this picture, right? We all see this picture. Everything around this picture is kind of like a detail balancing the photo, but this picture is the focus, right? So that's very interesting. Do we have grouping? By all means, we have a grouping. We have a series of objects here. We have series of objects here, series of objects here on the left, right? Well, in fact, the whole left corner is a series of objects. And then we can see there's a little bit, there's this stand here. I think it's a camera, right? And then there's a lot of pictures here, a little chair. So we've got things here on the left, things here on the right, thing in the middle. And just to tell us that this is not a locked up cage, the photographer made a little opening here and showed us that this is a very busy studio. There are things out there. So we've got groups of objects here on the right, on the left, in the center, and here, right? We are peeking into the room next door. Oh, that's lovely. And there's more grouping happening. Did you notice? Why did the photographer leave the blue ink or whatever it is here? I can't see. If you can see what it is, then good on you. And that blue and yellow here, why do you think? And look at this, this is blue. So we have grouping not just of the objects, but also of these colors. Blue, 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 I don't know, dark or blue, kind hard to tell. Then yellow, yellow. So that yellow contrasts with this, right? Reinforces. And why is it done? So that not to just throw in this picture and everything is black. It just would look really distasteful, right? So what you need to have is that yellow has to be repeated, maybe in here and in here. And look at this, the rack is kind of yellowish. So it contrasts with that blue, but there is a kind of story here because that blue is repeated in here and in here and in here. So there's continuity. There's a contrast, blue and yellow, but there is also continuity. Isn't it interesting? Like when you actually use those principles designed by or identified by Professor Ramachandran, and you actually, just like we are doing now, see how they work inside of this photograph, you can see so many things and you can learn at the same time so many tricks about how to actually create a good photograph. Hey, that's a good skill to have nowadays. And the way how the author has created this kind of blue yellow and blue yellow, it is not just continuity and contrast, continuity of the blue from here to here to here to here, and a contrast with this blue and with this darkness. It's not just continuity. What the author also did, it's called, pardon me, it's called peak shift. And by peak shift, it's meant that a particular feature in the picture is so attracting our eyes and so such a stimulus It's extremely stimulating. It's extremely attracting our eyes. And you can think for yourselves, what is it here that attracts so much your focus, your eyes? I have a feeling that it's this pinkness, yellowness, all of this, right? So it's kind of a very strong stimulus, but it is integrated in the picture. So even though it's kind of, in a sense, isolated, exposed, and attracting our eyes, it is also integrated in the picture exactly by this blue and this blue and this blue and the little yellow here, right, which is just by accident. It looks like thrown in there by accident, right? You thought that a photographer just came in and did a picture and it was just that. But now when you actually discuss it with me like this, you can see how much work actually got into this photo to just make it this interesting, even though it is just a bit of a mess, isn't it? Like, right? So that's the art of actually doing good photography or creating good pictures. And remember this one, problem solving, right? So we're looking at it and we can create a story about it. It engages us. We can talk about it, which is way more than we can do here, right? Not much to say. So we've covered more or less. These ones are just maybe less relevant for us today, okay? So why is it all important to academic writing? There will be certain things that I will show you in another video, not today, but today I just wanted to show you the most important things, why the principles of aesthetics or of aesthetic experience are important to our method. Do you recall this text? We were working with it right in the beginning when we were learning how to create abstracts, right? Remember, this was a text produced by Professor Andrew Lian and Professor Roland Sussex. But look at this. We've recorded that text on a particular using particular software that actually turns the voice of the reader into an intonation curve. Intonation curve is something like this. Forget the arrows. But intonation curve is a curve generated by voice as you are speaking. So computers, as you speak, can actually map how high and how low is your intonation. So every language has its own intonation pattern. I might have something here. They're just different. So this drawing on the bottom here would be probably, never mind what it says here. For this second, it's not important. But you can see your voice modulates. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, then it goes down, then it goes a little bit up, and then down, da, 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 da. So we have software nowadays in the world which we can use for the computer to actually draw our own intonation curves. And I will give it to you as well, right? It's not very simple. It's very simple to use, but it's not that simple, but for us might be enough. But let's have a look at something. So here are the sentences from that abstract produced by Andrew Lian and his colleague, Professor Roy Sussex. And look what happens here. When I play the recording, have a look how at the same time as the voice of the reader is being projected, the intonation graph is being drawn at the same time by the machine.
The adoption of English as the working language of Asia and the ASEAN region, together with an increase in the mobility of people and information, are creating new and significant pressures on language and culture education in English, as well as other languages in the region. It is also bringing about an enormously expanded use of English between speakers for whom English is not a first language. And this expansion includes communication in English between people of different cultural backgrounds. The surge in the use of English highlights a number of current challenges. English language proficiency levels vary widely across Asia. Communicative competence in English as a second language is at least equally problematic.
Okay, so that's just enough of this abstract. So let's have a look at the beginning.
The adoption of English as the working language of Asia.
Did you notice that? Did you not? Did you see what kind of a drawing we're getting from this? So we have here the adoption of English as the working language of Asia, right? So how is the reader, how's the author, it's actually Andrew Lian himself, how is he reading this? Is he reading the adoption of English, or is he saying the adoption of English as the working language of Asia? You can see what's happening here. The curve.
The adoption of English as the working language of Asia.
Did you see how it dropped? This is very, very important for our aesthetics. Why so? Because notice so many words. So the adoption goes really high, and then so many other words were said around the word the adoption, but they are not as stressed as the adoption. Let's have a look further.
And the ASEAN region.
Oh my goodness. In fact, and the ASEAN region is also not as much stress as the adoption of English. So in relation to here, what we had in our little painting here, it looks like the adoption of English is this focal point, this peak shift, this focus. This is the most important thing, the first thing a person sees when they look at this photo, right? So in English, when we write, we learn that the first thing in the sentence, the first word in the sentence is the most important word. It's like that picture here, right? So imagine if the author, instead of saying the adoption of English as the working language, imagine if Andrew Lian wrote something like English, the adoption in Asia as working. You can see it's ungrammatical, but you also wouldn't know how to read it because it's kind of English, the adoption in Asia, right? All of them you're stressing really high because you do not know, your intonation is not telling you which one is more important. So you're confused and you're stressing them all. But here, when a sentence is well constructed, it begins with the thing that matters, and then all the other objects are included as well, but they are not as stressed in the sentence as the first element, right? The first element in a sentence is the most important, the most stressed. So in English we say, the picture that you see here is really, really nice. The picture that you see here is really, 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 really nice. So notice how the intonation in English is falling. The picture here is really, really nice. The picture here is really, really nice. And what's Andrew doing? Let's have a look.
The adoption of English as the working language of Asia and the ASEAN region, together with an increase in the mobility of people and information, are creating new...
Now notice, friends, together went quite high, almost as this, but not as high. Sometimes the computer, especially when we have such a low resolution here, just very little space here, doesn't show it well. This is the highest. This one is high too, So together became high, almost as high as this. Why do you think so? Because it's a subordinated clause. You can see that. It is in commas here. You see the commas here? If this wasn't here, it would read, the adoption of English as the working language of Asia and the Asian region is creating a new and significant pressure. Intonation would have kept falling, right? Because the most important is this element. And from then on, we put things together, but this one is the most important, and from then on, everything is dropping. However, as we learned, in fact, the way how Andrew and Professor Sussex created their text, they inserted this subordinated clause and they divided it with commas to say it's an extra clause, right? So because they inserted it in here, the voice went up because it's like another sentence. So that became high because in English, the first thing in a sentence is accentuated, it's emphasized. So this became emphasized and this got emphasized as well, but not as high as this, but almost, right? Because it's a new sentence and because it's a sentence that was thrown inside of another larger sentence, we inserted commas here. So you learn how to put commas in. You do it when you throw in a sentence and your voice goes up. If your voice goes up, that means you threw in a sentence and you have to actually separate that sentence from the rest of the text with commas here. All right, so a lot of talking, hey? So let's have a look here.
The adoption of English as the working language of Asia and the ASEAN region, together with an increase in the mobility of people and information, are creating new and significant pressures on language and culture education in English, as well as other languages in the region.
Okay, we might stay with this sentence for a while, hey? Just analyze it a little bit longer. I've put here now those principles of aesthetics, how we process information for beauty. So let's analyze the sentence in relation to those principles, okay? And it doesn't harm us to listen to the sentence yet again.
The adoption of English as the working language of Asia.
Yeah, we see the drop. The adoption of English as the working language of Asia, right? So we see the drop. I might just do this here so you can see it better.
The adoption of English as the working language of Asia and the ASEAN region, together with an increase in the mobility of people and information, are creating new and significant pressures on language and culture education in English, as well as other languages in the region.
So let's try to analyze it. So we've got our painting here. We've got the text here. We've got the drawing here. I'm not sure whether you can see my cursor, but if you don't, then we will do another analysis to help it some more. Okay, so peak shift, right? Peak shift. What is the main focus? Something that really attracts our attention. We've spoken about it. It's the beginning. The adoption of English. Look at this curve right in the beginning. It's really high. The adoption of English. So every time when you create your sentences in English and when you listen even to your weekly exercises in your Moodle, now when you are dancing and tapping, try to the adoption of English as the working language of Asia, blah, 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 blah. right? So you can, but look at this, there are other peaks here. We've got other peaks. So we've got, remember, there's a peak shift here, and it's also an isolation principle. So isolation means what are the things which are sticking out, standing out? And there's a number of them standing out, like together with an increase in the mobility of people and information. So what is sticking out are the initial words of individual chunks in this long sentence. And why is the sentence long? Did we think about it? Why is the sentence long? Wouldn't it be easier to say the adoption of English was really good? Right? That would be no problem. But it would have been then exactly like that drawing of a child. Nothing to it, just a simple figure drawn, couple of scratches on the paper, and here is a figure drawn by a child. But academic writing is not a simple writing. It actually requires from us to put a lot of information in the text so that we can identify the most important bit of that sentence. The adoption of English, it is what we're talking about in this sentence. The adoption of English. We talk about Asian countries, we're talking about pressures, we're talking about other languages in the region, but all of this, just like in this painting, this photograph here on our picture, right? What's the most important element? Is that painting in the middle? Is that yellow, blue, pink painting in the middle, that bright object? That's the focal point. Everything in this little picture is organized around this painting, so it draws your attention, right? So just like the adoption of English is what is the topic of this sentence, and we will tell you everything about this in this sentence so that you can understand this picture better, right? So had we not had this in this painting on the right, had we not had all these objects, the camera and all of that, we wouldn't know why the painting is sitting there. But now we can see it's a studio. It's an artist's studio. There's a camera, there are other paintings, there's a little bit of a mess there. There are some gloves or maybe some cloth for wiping out things, right? You can see it's a working studio. Had the picture been on its own, it would have the same picture, the same painting, right? Had the painting of these flowers been there on itself, it would have been simple. It would have been nothing to this photograph. It wouldn't be interesting. But because the photograph captures the picture with all the elements in it, all the elements together, they create an interesting effect, right? So the same is with sentences. And so in every language, the same will happen, however differently. But so in English, in order to say to people, this painting of those flowers is the focal point, we put it right in the beginning. Say, the adoption of English. That's the equivalent of this drawing here with the flowers. And all the other bits that we're putting here in a sentence, and some of them are also important, like together. I'm not sure whether you can see the cursor, but it's that peak here you can see that is almost as high as the adoption of English, indication of a new sentence. R is just after it ends, and it's kind of lower because the sentence is running out of breath, right? A person organizes intonation and chunks according to how much they can say, but basically the sentence towards the end just runs out of energy and it falls down. So let's summarize here, okay? As soon as I start writing, this curve will go, but so be it. That's how the PowerPoint is designed. So what do we have here? How about if we actually duplicated it so we could actually so we don't mess up the whole screen. So we have what? We have this peak, right? peak shift, which is the adoption of English, right? Then we have, so that's a whole chunk here. The adoption of English is equivalent to this picture here, right? The adoption of English, that's the equivalent. But as the working language of Asia and the Asian region kind of starts creating a context around this photo, right? So it's not just the adoption of English, but we have kind of modified it. We said more about the adoption of English. So it's almost like starting to build more objects around this picture to make it more interesting so that the picture is not on its own, right? So it's similar. So we're starting to create groups. So that's one group, right? So it's one group. Then this is the second group, right? Then are creating new and significant pressures on language education in English, and that's another group, and as well as other languages in the region. Look at that, we have 4 objects here. Oh my God, that's a lot of objects, hey? A lot of objects. But this one is the most important one. That's why we have actually put here, because all these other objects, this one and this one and this one, are like this and this and this and this. They are very, very important to make the picture interesting, to make the sentence interesting, right? So it doesn't look like this. So all these other small chunks, like the objects in this photograph, they make the sentence interesting, filled with information. And when it is filled with information, then when you look at it, a person reading it, a person reading it is engaged in problem solving. They find it engaging, it's interesting, as opposed to this, right? There's nothing to say about this picture. Here, there's plenty of story, right? The important one, and there are groups. We have 4 groups, so we will have here 4 main peaks. There will be 4 main peaks to these 4 groups. And I have here a picture of it. There are 4 main groups here. 1, 2, now where is this? I had this beautiful pointer here. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and I don't know whether they separated or not. We can't hear it. This is just a photo. But we have these groups here. But remember how we had contrast? This was lighter and this is darker and so on. Do we have contrast in our sentence? By all means we do. How do we have contrast? Because it's high and it drops. The adoption of English, da 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 da, together the blah 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 blah, da 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 da, da 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 da. So the contrast is created that in the following way in English. Every chunk begins with the most important bit in it, right? So, and this most important bit in it is the one that we stress, right? So at the end of the day, you get this beautiful curve going down. So we do have here a clause we threw in, right, which is almost of equal value as the first one, but that's because it's an additional sentence that we threw in into a main sentence. But overall, the entire melody of this sentence has a dropping effect. So we have groups, once again, we have groups, and we have contrast, high, drop, high, drop. high, drop, and overall it's a drop. Right, so we've done a lot of things today, right? So you can see, in order to create, so what did we learn today about creating good sentences for academic writing, right? I don't know about any other writing, and we're not analyzing it today, but for academic writing, what we want. We want a peak shift, which means we want the whole sentence to begin with the most important item. It's the theme of a sentence. We're talking about this. What else do we want? We want, maybe guys, we will just copy that. Hey, that would be better. We just copy that, copy. We go to here, we paste it. Maybe we move it up, okay? So that, peak shift, we have a peak shift. What else? We have contrast, right? So did you notice how the arrow went back? Do you know what to do with the, so that the arrow doesn't go back? You right click on the arrow, you say bring to the front, and now the arrow will stay at the front. Okay, so we have peak shift, we have contrast, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. So, right, so we have groups. We have these groups here, and we have many of them, which means that the sentence is rich with information. Rich with information. It's also balanced. Look at these chunks, how pretty much equal in length they are. So it's not like the adoption of English was good. However, yesterday when we went to school, it was really, really nice, and the adoption of English, that didn't work, right? You try not to speak like this. Those groups, those intonation chunks inside of a sentence that drops from top to the bottom, they're kind of equal. And they give you this beautiful rhythm of English. So if you listen to someone reading a well-structured text, you fall asleep, right? That's what it is. That's why people, when we listen to someone's reading, we tend to fall asleep, because it is so well balanced, it is so well structured. The groups are even. The intonation is predictable. There are no violations of intonation. It goes from the top to the bottom, and it is so predictable we fall asleep after someone having read to us one page. That's why, and that's the art of good writing. So peak shift, symmetry, they all pretty much equal the groups. Contrast, we have contrast because we have very visible groups here, and they are divided by the jumps from high to low. Higher, not as high as this, but high, low, higher than the previous one, but low, higher than the previous one, but tendencies to drop. So we've got group and isolations. These are the isolation peaks, right? They are the isolation peaks, which means we have to have those isolation peaks so that we can actually differentiate when we finished one chunk and when we start another. But the tendency is to drop. Okay, so we will summarize it for today. It's a lot for an undergraduate student to take in, but it's fun. And it's enough already for you to use it when you analyze your own writing, okay? But let's have some fun here and see how we can actually read this sentence as it is spoken, okay? We'll just push it down a little bit so you can see it.
The adoption of English as the working language of Asia.
The adoption of English as the working language of Asia. He still has to say and the Asian region, notice. I wonder whether it will drop further. Okay, so the adoption of English as the working language of Asia, right? So it's building this group.
And the ASEAN region.
Look at that, and the Asian region, just is still flat, just went a little bit high here. I think it's because of a high vowel. But look at this, how consistent Andrew is. This intonation in this particular group, or chunk, you can call it, in this first yellow chunk. Look at it, how it just dropped. And now what will happen? It will go up because we have subordinated clause. If you don't know what subordinated clause, just ask your teacher Lala Bumela. It's an extra clause you throw in just to make the sentence richer with more information, and that's a good trick. Together, look at this. So we are contrasting now this group that we're creating now from the first group by hitting the intonation high and relatively high, like really high, because it's a new clause, subordinated clause.
Increase in the mobility of people and information.
So even though it started high, so when you read your abstracts and your text, when you start writing your text, read aloud the chunks, the whole sentences that you create, and feel whether you're actually keeping this drop, right? And if you put the wrong word in the beginning, and it is not as high, it doesn't feel that you're pronouncing it with such a accentuation and emphasis, the adoption of English, then you didn't get your theme right, right? So you have to change your word order, right? So watch your word order, not by thinking about it, but by pronouncing it and analyzing whether you begin your sentence with the theme, with the most important thing in your sentence. If you didn't, you got it wrong, okay? And the same for every group in your sentence.
Creating new and significant.
Creating. Look at this, how low it is in comparison to the first chunk, right? So the sentence is just running out of breath now. It's just finishing, but still is higher than the ending of a second group, but is really low in comparison to the first.
Significant pressures on language and culture education in English.
And now we are waiting for as well as other languages, right? Let's have a look what will happen now.
As well as other languages in the region.
Say hello and just drop beautifully. So this will do for today for our class. I will see how else I can help you with your thinking of the aesthetics. I'll create some more tutorials and give you access to record your own voice. But you don't need to really record your voice so much. You can feel it. You can say it, read it, ask your friend whether you actually are reading it correctly, right? So this. If you don't listen to any of my tutorials on aesthetics, this is the core. This is the most important aspect of it. But I will create one more at least, okay? So all the best, friends, and I'll talk to you soon.